What are we discussing on today's Locked on Diamondbacks podcast? With spring training 1 month away, how do we feel about the 2025 D-backs versus the 2024 D-backs?
You are Locked on Diamondbacks, your daily Arizona Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. You're listening to who? The always charismatic host of this podcast, Millard Thomas, multimedia journalist and graphic designer. So please go check out my website, millardthomas24.myportfolio.com. On there, you can see all my latest work, from my packages to my articles to my photos and my graphic design. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. On today's Locked on Diamondbacks podcast, we were discussing how we feel about the D-backs 1 month away from spring training as they enter 2025 compared to their 2024 version of themselves. We'll also discuss where are all the D-backs Hall of Famers and if any current players could potentially make the Hall of Fame one day in their careers. Then MLB announced some new minor changes for the rules, so we'll discuss that in segment number 3. So a whole bunch I want to talk to you guys about today. But first, I want to say thank you for making Locked on Diamondbacks your first listen every day. I would not be able to do this podcast without you, my loyal listeners, sharing, subscribing, reviewing, doing all that so I could do this podcast for you. Thank you. It's free. It's available on all platforms, so please continue to tell your friends. One of those platforms is YouTube. Please hit subscribe to Locked on Diamondbacks on YouTube. All right, back here on the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast. And with spring training 1 month away, let's discuss how we feel about the 2025 D-backs entering next year versus how we felt about the 2024 D-backs entering last season. Because, of course, last year, D-backs coming off the World Series appearance, you added guys like Jock Peterson, Jordan Montgomery, Erod, Randall Grichuk to your team. And so I think last year we definitely felt great about Arizona, right? You were coming off the World Series and all you did that offseason was improve, right? And so entering last year, we felt super high in Arizona. We felt like they were definitely going to take the step forward, probably make the playoffs as obviously not the division leader because you got the Dodgers, but definitely one of those wild card spots, right? And you look at 2024, and a lot of that, kind of was true. D-backs won more games than they did prior in 2023. D-backs led the league in runs scored, but in the end, they still missed out on the playoffs. And so when you're thinking about a team that you felt really high on entering 24, they ended up leading the league in runs scored. They did do some good things. Were a great second half team, but ultimately missed out on the postseason despite having a better run differential and a better record than the prior year. How can we now compare that team to how we feel about the D-backs entering 2025? Because looking at Arizona right now, considering we're coming off of a season where we led the league in runs scored, won 89 games and missed the postseason, it's kind of a weird time to be a D-backs fan right now because you felt like last season wasn't a failure or a disaster, but it was a disappointment because you missed out on the playoffs. So far this offseason, you already lost guys like Christian Walker, Jock Peterson, Randall Grichuk is currently unsigned, but you did bring in guys like Josh Naylor. You, of course, signed Corbin Burns. And so right now, when looking at this roster compared to last year, which team do we feel is better? Because by the end of last year, I felt really good about that D-back squad, at least offensively. We know pitching was a problem, but I feel like it was mostly due to the health of that rotation why the pitching fell apart. And if I'm looking at the D-backs 2025 lineup compared to last year's, I probably like last year's lineup more, no doubt, when you consider that DH position of Jock and Randall Grichuk was so dominant. Having a guy like Christian Walker as your first baseman who's like 40 home run potential, 100 RBIs, makes you feel really good. And so right now, I probably feel a little bit better about last year's lineup compared to the 2025 lineup. But knowing Corbin Carroll had that second half surge last season, I feel good about him entering next year. Josh Naylor isn't Christian Walker, but I think offensively he could be pretty close. Jake McCarthy had a big bounce back last year. Entering 2024, we did not feel good about Jake McCarthy. Pavin Smith had a second half surge last year, so we'll see what he can do. And really, there's some just younger guys that I feel like can be on the cusp of a breakout in 2025 that can hopefully offset some of those losses that we saw with the Jocks and the Gritchicks of the world. Because I think Gabriel Moreno, what he did for a few weeks there in 2024 really showed us the kind of offense player he can be. And I think Gabriel is going to be a little bit better next season. A guy like Geraldo Perdomo just feels like he's consistently getting a little bit better. Jake McCarthy, a full season. Pavin Smith, maybe a little bit better over the course of a full season. And so despite me not liking the lineup currently as much as last year, I still think the lineup probably won't score. It probably won't lead the league in runs scored, but I still think it could be a top 5 offense in the National League. I still think Naylor could replace a lot of that Christian Walker production. I think some of those young guys can still continue to get better, like the Gabriels, the Geraldo Perdomos. Maybe we see a little Jordan Lawler. Maybe Corbin Carroll goes up to another level. Like, I still think there's enough pieces offensively there. Maybe Adrian Del Castillo steps up more as a DH. Like, I think the D-backs still offensively right now still have enough pieces to be one of the better offenses in the National League, despite not being the best offense like they were last year. You look at the rotation, I mean, it has to be better than last year's, right? I mean, you have last year's rotation with Gallen, Kelly, Erod, Fott, Monty, Ryan Nelson. You still have that rotation, but then you added Corbin Burns. Like, you have a 7-man rotation, which is nasty. And the Burns, Gallen, Kelly 1, 2, 3, one of the best 1, 2, 3s in all of baseball, with Fott as your number 4. And then Erod, Monty, or Ryan Nelson as your number 5. Like, I've been saying D-backs should probably go with a 6-man rotation just because they have so many starters in their rotation right now. Talent-wise, depth-wise, D-backs rotation is just better than last year's. Obviously, last year we did feel good about the D-backs rotation because with Fott coming off the postseason run he had, of course, Gallen, Kelly were healthy. And then we felt great about Monty. We did feel good about Erod entering this season last year. So last year we probably felt like we had just a 1 through 5 where everyone we felt really good about. Next season, I think we feel like our top 3 is better than 2024 top 3 with Burns, Gallen, Kelly. But the Monty Erod stock has really, really taken a hit. And so I think we think our top 4 is better than last year's top 4, but that number 5 starter just has way more of a wild card factor than last year, because last year we were like, Monty, Erod, or Fott is going to be a number 5 starter, and whoever it is, we feel really good about. Next season, our number 5 starter is probably going to be Erod or Monty or Ryan Nelson, and we probably feel pretty good about Ryan Nelson, but also, was it just a one-year fluke? We'll see. Monty and Erod were absolutely terrible last season, so we don't feel as good about them in terms of that number 5 spot. But still, when you look at the overall ceiling of what the D-backs rotation could be in 2025, I mean, it just straight up higher than last year because you added Burns and you still had that wild card factor of Monty or Erod if they could get back to their all-star level. And so, the rotation, I think, is better than last year's. And then really it just comes down to the bullpen, because right now I would say the 2025 bullpen is better than last year's. We have AJ Puck in the building, who we did not have last year. Plus, we're still bringing back Ryan Thompson, Kevin Ginkel, Joe Mantiply, a lot of the guys that we saw last year that we loved. And then addition by subtraction. No more Paul Sewald, no more Scott McGuff, no more Miguel Castro, getting those guys out the building. More Justin Martinez, who did not start the season last year with the D-backs. He will be starting every game going into next year. And so Martinez, Puck, Ginkel, Thompson, Mantiply, I feel a lot better about as my top 5 than I did last year. Plus some wild cards like Gilbert Diaz, Bryce Jarvis, Blake Walston. I mean, one of the rotation starters because we have so many. Like, I think there's still a lot of interesting, intriguing wildcard pieces in the bullpen as well that we just did not have last year, because I knew what I was getting, the McGuffs and Castros. They were just bad. But at least the Jarvises and the Walstons and the Dre Jamesons and the Christian Menas, like, they still have this potential wild card, X factor to them, where it's like that Family Guy meme of, anything could be in the box, right? It could be $1,000. Heck, there could be a boat in the box, right? So that's how you feel about those young wild card, intriguing pitching prospects that the D-backs have. Get the old guys and Sewald and Castro out and bring in the young guys, because right now, when you look at the 2025 D-backs compared to last year, yes, the depth in the lineup was better, but overall, the rotation ceiling is better, the bullpen ceiling is better, and the offense should probably still be top 5 in the National League. So right now, 1 month away from spring training, even with the D-backs still having to make moves and still having to add another bat, adding another bullpen arm, I think could still make the argument right now that the 2025 D-backs entering next season, or entering this season, I should say, is better than last year's Arizona Diamondbacks squad. Now, we'll discuss where are all the D-backs Hall of Famers in segment number 2. And if you're looking to buy tickets to an upcoming sport or an event, then the best place to do that, of course, is going to be Game Times, because Game Time is the best place for last minute deals on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. They have this feature called All In Pricing. When you toggle this feature on, it shows you your total cost upfront with no surprise fees at checkout. You could get a panoramic view from your seat before you buy. They also have the lowest price guarantee, or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. All right, let's get back into the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast. And the next topic I want to discuss is, where are all the D-backs Hall of Famers? Because, of course, MLB Hall of Fame week, they announced their selection to the ballot. CC, Ichiro, Billy Wagner. And saying that Ichiro wasn't unanimous, that's a story for another day. But looking at this year's ballot and looking at last year's ballot and a lot of the Hall of Fame ballots, you realize something. Not a lot of D-backs representation. And when there is D-backs representation on the ballot, they either don't make it to the Hall of Fame, or if they're on the ballot, you probably don't consider them like an Arizona Diamondbacks player, right? Like Adam Jones was on the ballot last year. He had a cup of coffee with the D-backs his final season in the majors. No one is considering Adam Jones an Arizona Diamondback. Even if he made the Hall of Fame, you're not like, oh, look at Mr. D-back in the Hall of Fame. That's kind of the crux of this conversation I want to have. Where are all the D-backs Hall of Famers? Because when you look at the Hall of Fame ballots the last few years, the D-backs are just not represented in it at all. The D-backs, surprisingly, when you look at every player who's ever played in a D-backs uniform that eventually made it to the Hall of Fame, there's only 2 guys in D-backs franchise history, which sounds insane to talk about, but it's Randy Johnson and it's one other guy. Hold on, let me just pull it up. But there's only 2 guys in Arizona Diamondbacks franchise history to ever make it to the Hall of Fame, which sounds insane. It's not even Luis Gonzalez. Roberto Alomar in 2011 is the other guy who played for the D-backs and made it to the Hall of Fame. D-backs only have 2, and Roberto Alomar played a half season with Arizona. He played 38 games with Arizona. Randy Johnson, you can consider Mr. D-back because he won 4 straight Cy Youngs with the D-backs. But outside of that, there's only 2 players who ever wear D-backs uniforms to make it to the Hall of Fame, and only one of those guys you would even associate with the D-backs in Randy Johnson. And still, even Randy Johnson was 35 when he came over to Arizona. Like, he had a whole career where he won Cy Youngs with the Mariners, played on like 18 different teams. Like, even Randy Johnson, who's known probably as the D-backs guy, has spent so much of his career all around baseball. And so it's like, when you look at this D-backs franchise, they really don't have their own guy. You could say, I developed this player. He spent 15 years with us. We turned him into a superstar, and then he went on to be in the Hall of Fame. Like, the D-backs do not have those guys. And obviously, they're not the Yankees or the Dodgers in terms of their rich franchise history, only 27 years young, but still not having at least more guys who have had at least, a cup of coffee with the D-backs who are eventually good enough to make it to the Hall of Fame is also crazy. Like, one day Max Scherzer will make it to the Hall of Fame, and the D-backs will get credit for that, considering he played his first couple of years in Arizona. But for the most part, where are the guys that you're like, when you first see them, you're like, instantaneously, the first team I think of in association with that player is the D-backs? Even with Randy Johnson, there's not a lot of people that would think that, I think, outside of Arizona, if we're being honest, because I was a guy who grew up on the East Coast. When I thought of Randy Johnson, I probably thought of New York Yankees Randy Johnson first, despite everything he did with the Arizona Diamondbacks. And so for the D-backs, we need to do more of getting our representation, either keeping guys in the building and developing them into these superstar Hall of Fame talents, or just acquiring more guys that could potentially be Hall of Famers one day. Because right now, you look at that MLB Hall of Fame, which is supposed to be like a storytelling service of like the history of the game, right? Like the Hall of Fame is supposed to have this collection of all the greatest players from all the teams, where you could basically tell the story of baseball through the lens of all those great athletes. And for the D-backs, their history, their lore just kind of gets forgotten about if you're just looking through the prism of the Hall of Fame, because there's not a lot of D-backs representation in there. And so I kind of want to ask you guys, of the current Arizona Diamondbacks players, do you believe any of them could potentially make it to the Hall of Fame one day? Because right now the D-backs only have Randy Johnson, Roberto Alomar. Randy Johnson might be the only one they could even consider an Arizona Diamondback. And so when you're looking at the current roster, who's even on the team that you think could maybe make it to the Hall of Fame one day? Because I currently have 3 guys written down. Maybe there's more, maybe there's less, but I really think it's like 3 guys currently on the roster that can make it to the Hall of Fame one day. And you guys might think I'm kind of crazy with the names I'm going to say. The first one is the most obvious. I mean, Corbin Carroll. I mean, if he, the next 15 years, if he's 20 to 30 home runs, 30 to 50 steals, 800 plus OPS, leads the league in triples every year, great defense, like this was his worst season. He was still a 3.5 win WAR player on Baseball Reference. Like if he's around a 5-win player every single season for like the next decade, like Corbin Carroll does have the talent, and he could be on the Hall of Fame trajectory. But again, the MLB is so tough when it comes to their Hall of Fame, which it should be. The Hall of Fame should not just be a merry-go-round of everyone getting in. It should be super strict. And so Corbin Carroll will have to do a lot, but he seems like the most likely candidate with the type of numbers he can put up from a power, speed standpoint, with his box office appeal. I think he has the whole package to be a Hall of Famer. So if you were to do the rankings, I think he's clearly number 1. Then after that, that's when it gets kind of controversial for me. I put down Corbin Burnes as like the second most likely guy, just because you look at his career. He's got the Cy Young. He's got workhorse seasons where he's dominant with the strikeouts, innings pitched, good ERA. The only thing with Corbin Burnes is I don't know if he's going to have like the career that's long enough to be in the Hall of Fame, because he's been really good for about 4 seasons now, but he's already going to be 30 years of age. Like, how much longer can he be dominant at the peak of his game, right? Like, if he has a incredible 7-year stretch, is that enough for the Hall of Fame? Has he been that dominant to be considered a Hall of Famer? I don't know. I don't know if the sample size or if the dominance is there for Corbin Burnes. As great as he is, do you feel like he's a Hall of Famer right now? If he just stays on the pace he's at for another 3-4 years, does that make him a Hall of Fame pitcher? Because I think there's a lot of guys that have been close to Corbin Burnes over the last 15 years that are not in the MLB Hall of Fame. So I don't know if Corbin Burnes would be there if he continues on this path and trajectory. Right now, I would probably say he's on the outside looking in, even as good as he is. But I still would probably say he's the second most likely D-back to make it to the Hall of Fame. And then after that, I mean, it's really however you view the guy's talent versus their age, or versus what their potential trajectory can be. Because a guy like Gabriel Moreno, who's 24 years old, who you've seen be an elite defensive catcher and put together stretches of great offensive production, like, can he be a Hall of Fame catcher if he plays 15 years? Undoubtedly, wins like 12 Gold Gloves during that time, is like a career 280 hitter. Maybe he never puts together the power or anything like that, but if he's consistently a great contact hitter and a great defensive player year in, year out, and is like always a guy that like bats near the top of a lineup, is that enough to put a guy like Gabriel Moreno in the Hall of Fame? I don't think Ketel Marte has enough of a long track record of being dominant to make it to the Hall of Fame one day, so I didn't even include him in this conversation. Like the other guys that we're thinking about, really realistically, like, tell me if you think this is crazy, but a guy like Justin Martinez, if he's truly the D-backs closer of the future, he's 22 years old. The age part is the age and the talent is what makes me think he could potentially be a Hall of Famer if everything goes right for Justin Martinez. If he's the D-backs closer for the next 12, 13 years and he's dominant, then yes, potentially because of his ability to throw 100 miles plus and his strikeout ability, and like if he can just continue to work on his command, get that walk rate down. Like if you're telling me he's a 30 to 40 save guy with a low ERA and a high strikeout rate, like he has the talent to do it. And the reason I even bring him up because I was just looking at Mariano Rivera, who of course is the greatest closer of all time, but Mariano didn't become an elite closer or even really a full-time closer until he was like 25, 26. Justin Martinez is only 22, so he's got a few years of a head start on Mariano Rivera and has already shown this past season how dominant he can be. And so, yes, it might sound crazy to think of Justin Martinez as a potential Hall of Famer, but when you think of his talent and age, why not? Why can't he be on a Hall of Fame trajectory one day? And then I guess the other guy would be like a Brandon Pfaadt just because of his age. But he would have to dramatically get a lot better than where he is right now. Zach Gallen, like I probably don't think Zach Gallen is good enough to be a Hall of Famer one day. Like Zach Allen's going to be one of those guys that's like going to be on the ballot. You're going to look at his numbers, going to be like, man, Gallen was a great pitcher in his prime, but was he a Hall of Fame pitcher? Probably not. Gallen's going to be one of those guys that should be in the Hall of Great, Hall of Very Good, but not in the Hall of Fame most likely. So when I look at the D-backs players most likely to make it to the Hall of Fame one day, I think Corbin Carroll is number one, potentially Corbin Burns, potentially Jamar, Gabrielle, Zach Allen, but the cases for a lot of these players aren't strong, and the representation in the Hall of Fame for the D-backs, not very good at all. So hopefully we see a couple of the guys currently on this D-backs roster make it to the Hall of Fame one day, because right now the D-backs do not have enough Hall of Fame representation. Now we'll discuss some new MLB rules that are coming in 2025 in segment number 3. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. That's $300 to keep the action going. FanDuel is the app that is easy to navigate, and the variety of bets keeps every game exciting. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly, no waiting around for your winnings. Whether you're betting on your favorite team or just looking to add some extra excitement to the playoffs, FanDuel has you covered. My favorite thing to do on FanDuel is the same game parlay. Whenever the Suns are playing, give me KD over on 25 points, give me Booker over on 25, and give me the Suns money line. When it hits, which is not very often, it brings a big smile to my face. And if you want a big smile on your face, just visit FanDuel.com to join today and get started with $300 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right. Back here on the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast, and let's discuss some new rule changes that are coming to baseball in 2025 and if they're going to help or hurt the sport. Because one thing, not a rule change that is coming to the major league game, but to spring training at least, because we're going to get a little taste of the ABS system. The automatic ball strike system is coming to spring training for I think like half the teams, something like that. They're just going to test it out. Basically, players get like 2 challenges a game where if it's a ball or strike, they can say, hey, you tap your little helmet and you say, hey, I don't think that one was the good call. Basically, in 10 seconds, they'll show it on the video board. You'll get a little graphic and you'll know if the call was right or not. The thing with ABS system, all you're doing is challenging balls or strikes. You get a couple of challenges a game, and if Jordan Lawler in spring training gets called out on strikes and says, no, that was wrong, I think that was a ball, he can just tap his head and they'll know within 10 seconds if it was right or not. Umpires aren't losing their jobs. They still call the games. They still do balls or strikes. Just players now have the ability to challenge certain plays. If they think the umpire is wrong, the player is right, you keep your challenge. If the player is wrong, a challenge goes away. And so it should add a little bit of time to probably MLB games. That's probably going to be the biggest con, because Baseball just did a great job cutting time off games, going from 3 hours to 2.5 hours. I assume something like this could add a couple minutes back to the game. Probably not something that's dramatic or going to make you feel like you're back to being at a ballpark the whole day, but probably something that will add just a little bit of time to the game. But in the end, do I think it helps the sport if we eventually get the ABS system on the major league level? Yes. Yes, it does. There's still too many times where you see a bad call that's blatantly obvious, where there's runners on in a big moment with probably 2 outs and the umpire just flat out gets it wrong. We see these umpire reports after games where sometimes it's like 60% of the calls. Yes, maybe they got right, but a third of the calls you're getting wrong. And sometimes you've seen it for against the Dbacks, right? Well, you get a report and it's like, how accurate was the umpire today? How much did it affect the game? And sometimes you're like, the umpire was so bad, it might have added a run or two to the opposing scorer's offense, right? Because the umpire was so bad. The calls went so much in this team's direction that the other team got way more bases out of it, way more beneficial strikes and ball calls because the umpire was so bad. And it's like, why do we have such a discrepancy? Why is there so much human error in the sport? I'm okay with a little bit of human error, but if the technology is this good to get it right and they could get it right almost instantaneously, like that's the big thing. We have instant replay now in a lot of sports. And the thing is, instant replay takes away time from the game and kills momentum, right? In basketball, how many times were it was like the last 2 minutes and you just see replay after replay, and it's like the last 2 minutes of a game can turn into 30 minutes, right? Or in football, sometimes you don't know what a catch is. And so we need 30 replays to determine if the catch was right or whatever the play was. But in baseball, with the ABS system, go watch videos of how quickly it's turned around. You challenge, and within 10 seconds, you know it's a ball or a strike. And so if we have the technology to get it right and we can do it quickly and efficiently, we should do it. I'm okay cutting back instant replay in other sports when it takes like 20 minutes to get the call right. But in baseball, if it takes 10 seconds to get that ABS system right, I'm all for it. Some other minor changes that we're going to see, but it's going to affect the major league level. Stricter shift rules. If they see 3 players on the side of second base or whatever side of the base before the pitch is called, all the runners can now advance. Previously, you were just awarded a ball. Now the batting team can say, hey, there's 3 infielders on the left side of second base before that pitcher's thrown. If there's 2 men on and there's someone at the plate, everyone can get a base, right? If there's a man on third, a man on first, and I have someone at the plate, and then you do the shift, now that man on third is scoring, the man on first is going to second, and the man at home is now going to first base. Now, the issue is the shift rule. I mean, there wasn't a lot of shift violations last year. So as cool as the rule is, where if you can catch an opposing team putting a shift on, you can get a major advantage from it if you're able to call that opposing team out. The issue is there's only 2 shift violations in all of 2024. And so despite them making the rule stricter, it's not even like they had to enforce the rule that much last season, but I absolutely hate the shift. I think Big Papi would have been like a career 350 hitter if there was no shift. So I'm in total favor of any rule changes that enforce stricter shift rules. And then finally, the last rule change that we're going to see is something that I didn't even know was a thing that I feel like we never see happens. But basically, if there's men on first and third, 2 outs, it's a ground ball force play at second. If there's a situation where the runner on first runs through second base, so the man on third can can score, and then let's say the man who's running through second base, he just gets caught in a rundown to make sure the man can score instead of sliding and getting potentially thrown out. Now you can't just run through the bag to ensure that runner scores. Now the umpire can go back, challenge it, and says, yes, you run through the bag, the runner scored, but because you ran through the bag and abandoned the bag, you are now out. Previously, you were still allowed to be awarded the bag if you beat the runner and you abandoned the bag at the same time. Like if you beat the force out and you abandoned the bag, but the runner scored, you were allowed to at least go back to second base. Now, if you abandoned the bag, the runner scored. It really just depends. Did the runner score before you abandoned the bag? Because that is now the biggest point of contention in that argument. I don't even think this rule change really matters to the sport of baseball. Honestly, I don't even know why I'm talking about it. I just feel like I needed to educate you guys in case you didn't hear about it. So no more running through the bag. If there's a force out on second and try and get the man to third, you either have to slide, beat the tag, or if you do abandon the bag, make sure that runner scores before you do, because if you don't, you now have the potential to be thrown out and that runner will not score. So you can't just do the old, oh my God, it's a force play, let me just get caught in a rundown to make sure the runner scored. No, if they think you're doing a rundown just to make sure the runner scores, they can still say you're out if that abandoned bag situation happens before that runner even scores. And so hopefully that was easy to understand. Again, this is something that I don't even think we're going to see or be enforced. Like, I don't know how many times that even happens in the sport of Major League Baseball. And so just want to update you guys on those new rule changes. Sounds like we're getting closer to the ABS system, and I pray that we do, because I hate seeing all these terrible umpires getting calls drawn that affect the games, especially when we have the technology and the efficiency to do it quickly. Let's get the ABS system on the major league level. Now, that's it for this edition of the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast. Come back tomorrow for more Diamondbacks news coverage and insight. And as always, stay safe, stay healthy, doses.